What if I told you that some houses are built not for comfort, but to trap something darker, something that never leaves? Welcome to the Winchester Mystery House, a mansion that defies logic, where doors lead to nowhere and staircases twist into infinity. But what if it's not just the architecture that's strange? What if the house itself is alive? What if I told you that there's a deadly secret hidden within its walls that no one has ever dared to uncover? Join me as we step into the heart of the unknown. But be warned, once you enter, there's no turning back. The camera fades from black, revealing the imposing, eerie silhouette of the Winchester Mystery House under the pale light of the moon. The camera slowly zooms in on the dilapidated front gates, where the winds whistle through the trees. Jackson, a seasoned investigative journalist, approaches the gates, his breath visible in the cold night air. "They say this house is cursed," Jackson mutters, more to himself than anyone else. He gazes up at the mansion, a place whispered about in towns for years, a place where no one dares to step inside after dark. The legend of the house is well known. A widow, Sarah Winchester, who built the mansion as a sanctuary to appease the spirits of those killed by her husband's deadly invention, the rifle. But Jackson isn't here for the rumors. He's here for the truth. As he enters the mansion, the door creaks loudly and the air grows inexplicably cold. He can feel the weight of history in every step. The very walls seem to be whispering secrets from the past. Every corner he turns feels like the house itself is breathing, shifting, and waiting. Inside, the mansion is a labyrinth of winding hallways and bizarre, incomplete rooms. Jackson's footsteps echo in the silence as he walks deeper, guided only by the flickering light of his flashlight. The mansion feels too quiet, too still, unnaturally still. And then it happens. A sudden thud. Jackson freezes. It came from upstairs. He hesitates for a moment, his instincts telling him to turn back, but something pulls him forward. His heartbeat quickens. As he walks up the creaky staircase, the temperature drops even more. Goosebumps rise on his arms, but his curiosity overpowers his fear. "I have to know," Jackson whispers to himself. "I have to find out what happened here." As he reaches the top of the stairs, he spots something unusual, a door at the end of the hall that seems out of place. It's old, covered in dust, but it's locked from the inside. Jackson approaches slowly, running his fingers over the doorknob. It feels strangely warm, as though someone had just touched it. Suddenly, the door opens with a creak and Jackson steps inside. The room is dark, and there's a strange, pungent smell in the air. As his flashlight sweeps over the walls, he sees something that makes his blood run cold. Strange symbols drawn hastily in chalk, with what looks like dried blood streaked across the floor. "What is this place?" Jackson mutters. He's just about to turn around when the door slams shut behind him, trapping him inside. The locked room, panic sets in. Jackson is trapped. The door slams shut with a deafening noise, sending a rush of adrenaline through his body. His breath becomes shallow as he frantically tries to turn the doorknob, but it won't budge. The room feels smaller now, suffocating. His flashlight flickers wildly, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. He hears a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the far corner. "Get out." The voice is chilling, but Jackson can't tell if it's his mind playing tricks on him or something more sinister. Panicked, Jackson backs away from the door, his heart pounding. He scans the room for any possible exit. The walls seem to close in on him, and a strange sensation takes over his body, like invisible hands are gripping him, pulling him into the dark corners of the room. The atmosphere is thick, almost electric, as though something unseen is watching his every move. The ghostly presence, a vision from the past. Suddenly, the temperature drops drastically. Jackson's breath is now visible in the air, and the room feels like a freezer. His flashlight goes out, leaving him in complete darkness. He hears footsteps behind him. He spins around, but no one is there. The whispers grow louder now, and Jackson realizes they aren't just in his head. These are real voices, soft, desperate, as if coming from someone who has been trapped in this very room long before him. In the distance, the faint sound of a woman crying echoes through the room. Jackson's eyes widen as he hears a voice, clearer now, more distinct, calling his name, Jackson. He can feel a presence, cold and malevolent, surrounding him. Panic surges through his veins. He stumbles backward into an old mirror, only to be met with the reflection of a woman's face, pale and ghostly, staring directly at him. The haunting truth revealed. Shaken, Jackson stumbles away from the mirror and realizes something horrifying. The room has changed. The walls, once plain and old, now have strange symbols etched into them. Symbols that seem to be glowing faintly. He recognizes some of them from the chalk drawings he saw earlier in the room he had entered. He stumbles across an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. As he flips through it, Jackson's breath catches. The journal belonged to Sarah Winchester, and the entries describe her obsession with the spirits she believed haunted her home. But the deeper he reads, the more terrified he becomes. Sarah wasn't just building the house for protection. She was building it as a prison, a place to trap restless spirits, including one that was said to have been particularly dangerous. The spirit of a man killed by one of her husband's rifles. A deadly encounter. Just as Jackson tries to piece together the truth, he hears a loud crash, followed by a low, guttural growl. The room grows darker, and Jackson feels a cold breath on the back of his neck. Before he can react, something invisible grips his arm. It's not a human touch. It's cold, metallic, and unyielding. Jackson screams and pulls away, but the grip tightens. He tries to run, but his legs won't move. The room seems to stretch on endlessly. The shadows on the wall begin to move, forming into a human-like figure. Jackson's eyes widen in terror. The figure steps closer, its face obscured in shadow, but its presence feels all too real. He struggles to break free, but the entity pulls him closer, and as it whispers his name in a voice that's both guttural and faint, Jackson realizes, this house is not just haunted, it is alive. The struggle for escape, a house that won't let go. Jackson's heart races as the dark figure in the corner of the room approaches. He tries to back away, but the walls seem to close in around him, shifting and warping with each step. The air grows thicker, suffocating him. The temperature drops to a bone-chilling cold, and his breath comes out in visible clouds. He feels an invisible force tugging at his limbs, pulling him toward the entity. In a desperate move, Jackson grabs a broken chair nearby and swings it at the shadowy figure. But it passes right through, as if the entity isn't made of flesh and bone at all. His body is shaking, but his mind is clear. He must escape. He must survive. The door he came through earlier remains shut. But Jackson notices a small crack in the wall, a faint, unnatural light seeping through. He darts towards it, hoping for a way out. But as he reaches the crack, the light flickers and fades, revealing more dark symbols etched into the walls, all pointing toward him. These symbols seem to pulse with an ominous energy, drawing him in. Just then, the entity's voice booms from the darkness, louder than before. You can't escape. You are mine now. Jackson's body freezes. The air around him vibrates with an unseen force. He turns, his body covered in a cold sweat. But he refuses to give in. He pushes against the wall, desperately trying to find an escape. But the house seems to have a will of its own. Its wooden beams creak, the floorboards groan, and every direction feels like a trap. Unveiling the dark past, the story of Sarah Winchester. In the midst of this chaos, Jackson's eyes catch sight of something important, a dusty old portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. It's a faded picture of Sarah Winchester, but there's something strange about it. Her eyes seem to follow him, her expression cold and calculating. He quickly rushes toward it, his instincts telling him there's more to this image than meets the eye. Behind the portrait, Jackson finds a hidden compartment. Inside, there's an ancient-looking chest. With trembling hands, he opens it and finds a series of documents and photographs, some depicting Sarah, some showing the construction of the mansion, and others showing strange rituals being performed in the house. The more Jackson examines these documents, the more he realizes that Sarah Winchester's obsession with building the mansion was not just about trapping spirits. It was about summoning something far worse, a powerful, vengeful entity that had been bound to the house, one that could never be set free. Jackson's eyes widen as he reads a journal entry that describes the entity in chilling detail. It feeds on fear. It grows stronger with each life it claims. The house is its prison, and only the living can set it free. The entity attacks, a desperate fight for survival. Before Jackson can process the full meaning of the journal, the temperature drops even further. A deep, guttural growl shakes the walls, and the room grows darker still. The entity materializes fully in front of him, its form shifting, never fully human, but something twisted and monstrous. It stands in the doorway, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, its mouth twisted in a sinister grin. Jackson knows he has no time left. The house is closing in around him, and the entity is hungry. He grabs a piece of broken wood from the floor and holds it out in front of him, trying to steady his breath. He can feel the entity getting closer, its presence suffocating him. "You can't fight me," the entity growls, its voice echoing around the room. "I am the house. I am everything you fear." With one final, desperate move, Jackson lunges forward, thrusting the wooden shard toward the entity's heart. But it passes through the figure like mist, and Jackson feels an icy cold grip on his throat. The entity lifts him off the ground effortlessly, its grip like steel. In that moment, Jackson realizes that his only chance is to confront the entity's power and use the house's design against it. He must find the one thing that Sarah Winchester had hidden within the house, something that could destroy the entity once and for all. The final discovery, the source of power. Jackson's mind races. He remembers the strange symbols on the walls and the journal entry he just read. Sarah had tried to trap the entity by using the very architecture of the house, creating a ritualistic maze meant to confuse and contain it. But the entity was stronger than she had anticipated. In a desperate final act of will, Jackson manages to break free from the entity's grip, stumbling toward the heart of the house, the center of the maze. As he runs through the winding corridors, the house seems to shift and rearrange, trying to trap him in its labyrinth. Finally, Jackson reaches a hidden chamber deep within the mansion, where a large stone altar sits in the center. The symbols etched into the walls are identical to the ones he had seen earlier. In the center of the altar is a small, glowing crystal, Sarah's final attempt to trap the entity. Without hesitation, Jackson grabs the crystal, and the ground beneath him trembles violently. The walls crack, and the entire house begins to shake. He can hear the entity screaming in fury, its power fading as the crystal begins to glow brighter and brighter. The final confrontation, the end of the house's curse. In the last moment of his fight for survival, Jackson plunges the crystal into the altar, and a blinding light erupts from the stone. The entity screams, its form disintegrating into the light. The house trembles violently, as if in pain, before falling silent. For a moment, everything is still. Jackson is left in the center of the chamber, breathing heavily, his body bruised and broken, but alive. The house is silent. The curse has been lifted. The entity is gone. But as Jackson stands there, he can't shake the feeling that he's not alone. He looks up, and in the reflection of the broken mirror, he sees the faint outline of Sarah Winchester's face, watching him from the shadows. The haunting calm. Something isn't right. Jackson takes a step outside the mansion, the sunlight blinding him after being trapped in the darkness of the house for so long. He exhales deeply, as though he can finally breathe again. The oppressive weight of the house, the terror that had followed him, seems to lift with the first rays of daylight. He stands still, feeling the weight in his chest ease for the first time since entering the house. But then, a strange vibration in the ground catches his attention. It's faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grows stronger. The ground shifts beneath him, and he looks up to see the house standing as it had before, towering, ancient, and full of shadows. Jackson's heart starts to race again. He takes a few cautious steps toward the door, but something feels wrong. A hidden truth. The house never lets go. As he approaches the entrance, the door slams shut by itself, and the air around him grows cold once again. Jackson tries to open it, but it's stuck, locked. The house seems to be reacting, responding to him, trapping him in a way he hadn't anticipated. His breath catches in his throat when he hears a faint whisper, coming from somewhere deep inside the house. He can't make out the words, but the tone is unmistakable. It's waiting for him. He glances over his shoulder, and in one of the windows he sees her. Sarah Winchester. Her figure is clear in the window, and as their eyes meet, Jackson feels the blood drain from his face. Her expression is as cold and unsettling as the portrait he had seen earlier. The true nature of the curse, it's not over. In that moment, Jackson realizes the terrifying truth. The house is never free of the curse. It may have let go of the entity for now, but the mansion itself is bound to something darker, something that even Sarah Winchester had not fully understood. The curse will never be truly lifted. It waits. Always. Jackson backs away from the door, panicked. He turns toward the edge of the yard, his mind racing to understand the implications of this horrifying discovery. But before he can make a move, the ground trembles again and the mansion shifts, a familiar, ghostly presence creeping back. The whispers in the wind grow louder, the air colder. The house calls to him again, as though it's beckoning him back inside. Jackson knows that he hasn't escaped. The mansion may have let him leave physically, but its grip on him is far from over. The house that never sleeps. The shadows stir again. Jackson stumbles back from the door, heart pounding, his eyes scanning the mansion for any signs of movement. The sunlight feels cold now, distant, as though the house has swallowed all warmth. The whispers he heard earlier grow louder, more urgent, like voices calling from deep within the walls, growing stronger the farther he steps away. It's as though the house itself is alive, aware of him, watching him, and it won't let go. As Jackson turns to flee, he hears the floorboards creak behind him. He whips around, his breath shallow. In the corner of his eye, a shadow moves swiftly across the wall. It's not the wind. It's not a trick of the light. Something is moving within the house, and it's coming for him. His pulse quickens. There's no more time for hesitation. He must leave. The final step, the hidden path. Desperation fuels Jackson's movements as he runs toward the gate. But the familiar feeling of dread is growing. The further he gets from the mansion, the more it feels like the house is pulling him back. The ground beneath his feet shakes again, and the trees lining the driveway sway as though something is breathing through them. Jackson's mind races. He doesn't know what's happening, but he can feel the house's grip on him tightening. The sensation is overwhelming. He's not just physically trapped, but his very mind seems to be falling under the influence of the mansion. He reaches the edge of the property, but before he can step out onto the open road, he sees something that stops him dead in his tracks. A thick mist rolls across the ground, spilling from the mansion like a living thing. The mist moves like tendrils, wrapping around his ankles, pulling him toward the front gate. Jackson struggles, but the more he fights, the more it pulls. The mist is thick, dark, and cold, and as it wraps around him, he hears the faintest whisper, "You cannot leave. You never will." The return of the entity, a new terror. Suddenly, the ground shakes violently, and the door to the mansion creaks open on its own. From within, Jackson hears the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. The air grows colder, and he sees a shadow move toward him through the mist, a figure, tall and twisted, its face obscured by darkness. The entity, or something that was once the entity, is back, but it's no longer the same. It has morphed into something far darker, far more sinister. Jackson feels a wave of terror crash over him. The entity steps closer, its form shifting with each step, as though it is not bound by the laws of the physical world. Its voice, faint but unmistakable, booms in his head. "You belong to me now. The house is my prison, and you are the key to my freedom." Jackson realizes with a jolt that the house's curse was never just about the entity. It was about him. The mansion had been waiting for someone to break the curse, and Jackson, unwittingly, had become the one to set it free. But in doing so, he had unknowingly given the entity its power back. And now it is stronger than ever. A new prison. The house claims him again. The mist continues to coil around him, tightening like chains, and Jackson realizes he is trapped once more. The mansion looms in front of him, its once grand structure now more sinister than ever. The walls of the house seem to shift and breathe with a malevolent energy. Jackson tries to run, but the mist pulls harder, suffocating him, dragging him back toward the door. As he struggles, the door slams shut again with a deafening bang. The house has reclaimed him. The curse is not over. It's just begun. Jackson's heart races as he stands frozen in place, feeling the entity closing in around him. He can't escape. He can't fight it. The house is alive with dark energy, and he is its prisoner. His only option now is to face whatever horrors the mansion holds and hope for a way to end this nightmare once and for all. The curse unveils, a prison of the mind. Jackson is no longer fighting against a physical entity. As the mist coils tighter around him, his mind begins to unravel. His thoughts grow blurry as the very essence of the mansion seeps into him, infecting his senses, turning his thoughts against him. It's as though the house is trying to take control of his mind, bending it to its will, breaking him down piece by piece. Every door, every shadow, every whisper fills his head with visions, horrifying glimpses of the mansion's past, images of people who had come before him, all trapped, all lost within the house's walls. Jackson feels his legs give way as the mist continues to drag him closer to the mansion's entrance. The door slowly creaks open on its own, and he is forced to step inside. He is drawn in as if the house has claimed him, like a prisoner to its walls. With every step, the air thickens, suffocating him, and his heartbeat echoes in his ears. He stumbles across the threshold, feeling his breath hitch as he realizes he is standing in the same grand hall from which he had once escaped. But now, it is different. The walls have become more oppressive. The ceiling seems to loom closer, and the air smells of decay, of death, of something ancient and unyielding. The entity returns, a bargain with darkness. Jackson's legs buckle, and he collapses to his knees. The mist evaporates, and a cold, echoing voice fills the air. "You thought you could escape, didn't you? But you will never leave me. The house calls to you, Jackson. You are a part of it now, as I was, as Sarah was. We are all bound by its curse. And in the end, it's not the house that you fear. It's the darkness inside you, the darkness I've awakened." The voice belongs to the entity, but it has changed. It sounds deeper, older. It speaks directly into Jackson's mind, urging him to accept his fate, to become one with the mansion. In that moment, Jackson realizes that the entity was never just an external force. It was a part of the house itself, a creation born of the twisted energy that radiates from its walls. The mansion is the curse, and those who enter, those who seek to break it, are swallowed by it. The house doesn't want to destroy its victims. It wants to consume their souls, make them part of its eternal existence. Jackson's eyes widen as he hears Sarah Winchester's voice, not in the distant past, but here, now, in the present. "I couldn't escape either. Neither can you." The final choice, becoming the curse. In the center of the room, Jackson sees something that stops him cold. A crystal, glowing faintly with the same eerie light he had seen before. It rests on a pedestal, the same pedestal Sarah Winchester had placed it on. His heart races as he realizes the horrible truth. The crystal isn't just an artifact. It's the key to the mansion's power. It can either trap him forever or give him control, but at a cost. He approaches the crystal, his hand trembling. The air around him vibrates with an unnatural force. The entity's voice fills his head again, warning him that touching the crystal will bind him to the house forever, that he will become part of its dark energy. But Jackson doesn't hesitate. He must make a choice. With a deep breath, he grabs the crystal. The last act, a twist of fate. As soon as Jackson touches the crystal, the house shakes violently. The ground beneath his feet splits open, and the walls seem to close in on him. The energy that pulses from the crystal is overwhelming. He feels his body being torn apart as the house's dark power consumes him, melding him into the very fabric of its existence. But then, just as it seems he will be lost forever, something shifts. The walls of the mansion begin to distort, warping as though reality itself is bending. Jackson's mind, though overwhelmed, catches a glimpse of something, a figure in the corner of the room. It's Sarah Winchester, her face twisted in anguish, her hands reaching out as if to warn him. "It's not too late," she whispers. With all the strength he has left, Jackson forces his mind to resist the pull of the mansion. The energy from the crystal surges through him, but now he fights back. In one final act of defiance, he shouts at the house, at the entity, "I refuse to be a part of you." Suddenly, the walls collapse. The house implodes, its dark energy imploding inward, as Jackson is flung out of the mansion's grip. The final moment, is he free? Jackson wakes up on the ground, gasping for air. The mansion is gone. The crystal is no longer in his hand. The sun is shining, and for a brief moment, he believes he is free. But then, as he stands up and looks around, his heart drops. In the distance, he sees a figure standing in the now empty space where the mansion had once stood. It's Sarah Winchester, but her face is now a mask of despair. "You may have escaped this time," she says softly, her voice carried on the wind. "But the curse of the Winchester Mystery House never ends. It lives within you now." Jackson freezes, the horror creeping back. He glances down at his hand, and for the briefest moment, he sees the faint glow of the crystal reappear. And then, everything goes dark.